And welcome to another edition of Marco and the Fish on the Walker Talks Radio Network. It's been a minute, Marco. Fit to be back here doing another podcast, talking some NFL. Last time we did one of these, the season hasn't started, and week 3 got underway last night. What do you say we talk about what we've seen over the course of the first few weeks in the NFL?
Yeah, I'm excited to do it. An exciting 2 weeks for sure. Obviously a long way to go, but already some really interesting developments. And yeah, I'm ready to get into it.
And it's let's start. We'll start things off in the AFC. We'll just go from the first 2 weeks and then what we might expect to see this weekend. Of course, we have one game in the books for week number 3 all night last night. That looked more like what we expected out of both teams so far this year. The Patriots kind of been playing over their head a little bit, down to earth last night, and that will happen when that Jets defense is clicking. There is in the NFL that showed last night.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously the Jets, a little bit of a slow start, not really much harder of a matchup you can get week 1 than the 49ers on the road. But even last weekend's Tennessee, they got the win, but in that first half of the game, they weren't exactly dominant dominant in the way that you would expect them to be against a team like Tennessee. But last night they really turned it on. And that Patriots team, a team that was a whisker away from being 2-0, they showed us about what we expected. That offensive line just simply could not hold up. And I expect going forward, it's going to be more so that Patriots versus the Patriots team that beat Cincinnati week 1.
Right. So since we started there, let's start with the AFC East. Some thoughts so far. I'll go first. Buffalo, the division like it usually does every year. But the only difference is this time is it may not have been quite as expected this time around. Buffalo looking really good. Now, the first 2.5, 3 quarters of the season at home against Arizona, everybody's like, ooh, well, may have problems. Came back, won that one, and fantastic on the Miami in winning that game in dominant fashion. It did anything to do with who went down. This was a domination by the Bills from the very beginning. But right now, Buffalo looking like the team to beat. Miami with more questions than answers. And we'll see what happens with Skylar Thompson, how long he's going to have to be at the there, what that means for all those great skill position players there in Miami. But so far through 2 weeks for me, my report card is Buffalo A+. Miami grade them right now. We'll say for me a B-, C+, something like that. Patriots got blown out last night. Look, we went into that season thinking they're top, bottom 1 or 2 in the league, and they may end up being that way. But the first 2 weeks was good, solid football, and one of them that it was not a fluke that they went to Cincinnati and won. They outplayed them the whole game and nearly had a chance to go to 2-0 at home in Seattle. Fell short in that one before losing last night. So I'm going to give them a solid B+, even though they're 1-2. I had zero expectations for them. And the Jets last night look a little bit more like what I think we all expect them to look like as the season goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, starting with the Patriots, kind of like you said, the expectations were very low coming into the season. But, aside from just the results, you did see promising signs. You saw young players stepping up, making plays, specifically Keon White on the defensive line, really making an impact, really making plays. These are the things you're looking for in a season that you're kind of already, I don't want to say writing off, but, not expected to contend for a championship. You're looking to see young guys make plays, step up. You're looking to see your first-year head coach really show some leadership. So I think it is promising signs. I think the big question, obviously, we saw a little bit of Drake May last night. It didn't look amazing, but I think the big question, I think it's more if, not when, we see Drake May start games. And so once you see him get into the mix, I think that'll be kind of the overall defining feature of the Patriots season if he looks like he can be the guy going forward. Now, moving over to Miami.
About that is the message out of New England before the season started was they want to make sure that what they have at offensive line before they run Drake May out there. Well, you may not have that answered all season. So,
Yeah.
I mean, when does that point where you say, okay, you want to kind of protect him, but we've also got to play him to find out what we have?
I think at a certain point, you just kind of have to get the guy reps. I mean, we saw it last night. The offensive line did not look good. I mean, Drake May, in his limited action, was running for his life out there, taking shots. And you don't want that for your young guy. But at the same time, I really don't think in today's NFL, where guys have less and less time to really prove themselves, you can really justify taking a guy that early and then not letting him take a meaningful snap the entire season. You got to see him at some point. Jacoby Brissett, I think he's a great guy for the spot that they have right now. He's a game manager. He can win you games if your defense is playing well, if you're putting him in a position where he doesn't really have to be Superman. But yeah, I think maybe, week 9, week 10, somewhere along those lines, if things go the way I think they will for the Patriots, and they have a tough run of games coming up. I don't have it off the top of my head, but they play some teams going forward. I think they play
The schedule, but it is what it is.
I think they have San Francisco maybe next week, so that's not going to be fun for them. But I think it's all going to be about when we see Drake May and then how he looks, given obviously the rough situation offensively that he's going to be in. Not a lot of great skill position players. Obviously, we talked about the offensive line. So grading him on a bit of a curve for sure. But I think that would be the defining feature. But moving on, I want to talk about Miami. Miami, I think you and I were both extremely, extremely high on Miami coming into the season. And look, with the Tua injury, you can't really hold that against them necessarily, losing their quarterback. But they didn't look good with Tua against Buffalo. I mean, that was a statement game for Buffalo. Coming in there, I think a lot of the talk, not just from us, but from the overall sports media was expecting Buffalo to kind of lose their spot at the top of that division. And they really kind of put their foot down and said, no, like, we're still here. We still have Josh Allen. We might have lost some guys on both sides of the ball, but we're still here. We're still ready to contend. I thought that was a very surprising result in my eyes and a very definitive result, as definitive as it can be early in the season. Obviously, we got a long way to go, but that was a really, really telling game for me.
I wonder, look, I am not one to focus or have much of any interest on off the field things. I'm far more in tune to what's happening in between the white lines. I have to wonder if the Tyreek Hill situation was, in fact, a distraction going into that football game. I'll just say this. For me, I think about me, what enough about it to let it bother the way I played? No. But that doesn't mean it can't be an actual distraction in that locker room, especially on the heels of a huge game like that Buffalo game. So drawing that parallel there, for me, I think one of the bigger issues is, though we like Miami because of the offensive side of the ball. They have defensive questions. They had it coming into the season, and they still do. The offensive injuries and issues they're having there, it's unravel on them pretty quickly. Stabilize this thing, or it becomes a lost season. I think this next couple of weeks is very, very critical for the health mentally, if you will, of that team going forward for the rest of the year.
Absolutely. I mean, we know Tua, we don't really have an exact timetable. We know he's been placed on IR, so I think he'll miss 4 weeks at a minimum. So we know you're going to have some games without him, and you need to win a couple of these games if you really want to, like you said, not just record-wise, but for the mindset of the team. You can't go and lose 4 straight games with your backup quarterback and be in such a deep hole that you have to climb out of. That's just not a spot you want to be in, and that's not a spot that's going to lead you to the goals that you had coming into the season. Especially, this is a team with Super Bowl aspirations coming in. If you're sitting there at 2-4, 2-5, 1-5 maybe. I mean, for a team especially that doesn't have that championship pedigree, that hasn't really succeeded in the playoffs, I really do wonder if they'll have the fortitude to kind of like keep that positive mindset, keep believing.
And at best right now, I mean, I think they're clearly third best in that division at that time. And people who have Super Bowl aspirations are not generally the third team in their division. Let's move to the AFC South so we can keep this thing on pace. The AFC South, boy. Hey, if you're a Texans fan, the world is your oyster. Matter of fact, the division's already over. If we're truthful about it, the Houston Texans 2-0. The rest of the AFC South 0-6 combined. Not a win between the other 3 teams, and frankly, they've all looked bad. They've all looked bad. The Titans defense, they're going to have to keep that team in games the season, and so many moving parts there. Let's remember, you got new coordinator for all purpose. Will Levis is a brand new starter, if you will. Abound on that offensive line. The running game looks all right. Jacksonville, boy, nobody really talked about Jacksonville a whole lot publicly, but there was that expectation. This team was a winning football team last year. They won 9 games last year, and it not really materialized, but you felt like if everything fell into place, this would be a bounce back year for the Jags. And with Indy, it looked like outside of the secondary, and Chris Ballard's in, I don't even want to go down that road. You know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
That secondary. Now, they've lost 2 close games, but in reality, if you looked at that game with 16-10, and I'd have told you that with 5 seconds left, if the Colts complete a 65-yard pass at extra point, they win that game, you would have thought that was a close football game. That game was anything but a close football game. You give credit to Malik Willis, who went, I think, 14 of 16. Just ran for 700 yards in the first quarter. It was a little bit of an exaggeration, but the Colts look so bad across the board in every facet of their game outside of Jonathan Taylor. 3 teams in the AFC South, bitter disappointments, but as far as the Texans go, and here's what really irks the other teams in the division, I think, especially Indy fans, is the players that are putting them over the top are that they went out and got. The guys that look, CJ Stroud's killing it. Duh. We expected that. We know that. Nico Collins, who I'm going to tell you right now, back from a lot of folks out there, don't really care. Collins is the best receiver in the league right now. Not Justin Jefferson.
I was going to say, yeah.
Just for a second.
Not crazy.
The size is there. The hands are there. The route running, the intensity. He drops nothing. You king him down. He blocks like a monster. He will match up for anybody. And this, look, it's not as if he's doing this because he has Tank Dell, who hadn't really done much of anything yet, and Diggs. They happen to be there along with right and doing their part too, but Collins looks like the best receiver in the game right now. Everything the Texans are doing, Danielle Hunter, great pickup. Huge pickup as a tackling machine right there. And let's remember something, they don't even have the Nico Autry for the first 6 games of the season. Every bit the hype. The rest of the division, complete dumpsters.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure if I'm ready to anoint Nico Collins as the number one guy quite yet, although it's not a crazy thing to say. I definitely see the vision. He's absolutely outshined those other 2 very talented receivers in that receiving core. And the Texans are as advertised, like you said. I have to say, though, Jacksonville, probably at this early stage in the season, the most disappointing team for me. They were a team that I was kind of high on, maybe higher than most people coming into the year. I saw the talent that was there. But it just hasn't worked. And I think a lot of it comes down to coaching, specifically in that first game. That first game, they were in a spot to win it. And then you have the unfortunate fumble with ETN on the goal line, right? If he crosses that, the plane, he scores that touchdown. That game is practically over for all intents and purposes. But I think a lot of that falls on coaching, where you let your team fall down the tubes in a game that you've been dominating and just completely have it lose fall out of your grasp. And that's really disappointing from a coach like Doug Peterson. Jacksonville is a team that had expectations. They're not living up to them. Something's got to change fast down there in Duval County, because this is just not what we expected. And at some point, you got to say that the clock's running out. Trevor Lawrence, he's not a rookie anymore. He's not in his second year. At some point, you got to see results. You got to start winning football games. You got to win playoff games, And Houston looks like the dominant team for sure. Houston looks like,
yeah, for sure.
And then if we're moving to
Marco.
I was just going to say, and then with Indianapolis, Anthony Richardson, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The one play he's making the most impressive throw I've seen in a long time. The next possession, he's overthrowing his receiver and, right to the safety. So they got to figure something out there. They got to get more consistency out of that guy.
Playing great. Marco, even if he was playing football, they'd still be 0-2. It'd still
That's
be
true.
Because this team simply cannot. And look, don't get me wrong. I like Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon just fine. They're good running backs. Made to look like these are the greatest running backs that ever lived. They're not getting contact till 3rd level type.
Mhm.
Now you force Buckner on the IR. There is nothing to like about this defense, and that was supposed to be Chris Ballard's baby, was the defensive line, and it's been the worst one in football so far. So about Anthony Richardson, he's been all right at times, but he's not going to win any games with that defense behind him. And I'll put it to you like this, not that anyone gives a damn about my fantasy team. Caleb Williams and DeAndre Swift in my starting lineup this week. With to me, completely justifiably so, because this Indianapolis defense has been as bad as we've seen in the league so far this year, especially against run. Moving on to the North, Marco. It's a hard division to figure out who on the least talented, because their defense is very, very good. Very suspect roster, and the Pittsburgh Steelers sit at 2-0. Mike Tomlin working magic somehow again, besides suspect quarterback play, and I'm trying to put that nicely. Little offensive production. I don't think they've scored 20 points this year, have they? But they have needed it because the defense hasn't given up a single thing. Don't get me wrong. You're not going to gauge everything by how you do against the Denver Broncos, but they did go to Atlanta and totally shut them down. That same Atlanta team that won in Philly the very next week and moved the football. Bijan Robinson ran all over the place, didn't do a thing against Pittsburgh. Tomlin continues to find a way to win games. But here's what's weird about this division: the most talented team in it, they have to play in Dallas this Sunday. that being the Baltimore Ravens. If they lose this football game, they're 0-3. And there is no excuse for that. I don't care what the schedule looks like. This team should never be 0-3 to start the season off. But one of those two teams is going to start off. It's already been a bitter disappointment, but one of those teams is going to walk out there in major trouble. Either Dallas sitting at 1-2, or the Ravens even worse off at 0-3. But the Ravens, I can't figure out what's going on right there. Cincinnati, when they lost, we could talk about, they didn't have T. Higgins. That's handled. New England did not back their way in the win. I watched that game. They were the better team. That should not be the case, no matter what, especially in the first game of the season. And then you got Cleveland. I'm starting to believe now. Now we'll see. You got two 1-1 teams, an 0-2 and a 2-0 team, but nobody played what I would consider to be really good football. Look at this. And by the way, it's probably time to stop calling Jerome Ford a backup running back. Has continued to put up numbers every time he goes out on the field. And since Nick Chubb got hurt last year, this has been his backfield, and he continues to do well. Still waiting for Deshaun Watson from Houston to check in. If I can get the Deshaun Watson from Houston to play in Cleveland, they could up to the top of that division potentially. But this is of all the divisions, this probably more than any other is a big fat bunch of question marks so far for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a division that we anticipated was going to be one of the best coming into this season. And I mean, it's just been completely flipped upside its head. Now you have Pittsburgh going to play the Chargers this week. Justin Herbert just got ruled out of that game about 15 minutes ago. So, I mean, we don't want to obviously count games before they happen. They still have to they play the games for a reason, but there's a very real possibility the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be 3-0 coming into this. And like you said, you could have Baltimore at 0-3. Cleveland, I said this before the season started, I think that team will only go as far as Deshaun Watson takes them. And from what we've seen these first 2 weeks, obviously week 1, an absolute disaster. Last week, they got the win, but are we really saying he looked how we wanted him to look? He looked like the quarterback of a team that's going to contend in the playoffs, contend for a Super Bowl. I can't say he looked like that. And you look at Cincinnati, I also watched that week 1 game against New England. And man, if you came into that game without any knowledge of these two teams and what their expectations were, you would have thought it was 2011, and the Patriots were dominant and the Bengals were a bottom feeder. I mean, it was shocking to say the least. You have to wonder maybe if the Jamar Chase situation, if that long holdout is playing into it. Obviously you saw the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty last week against Kansas City. That's definitely concerning. You never want to have any sort of, dissension within the locker room, especially when your team's not in a very successful spot right now. And you're kind of in a spot where you need the boys to come together. You need the guys to believe, you need everyone to be fighting for the same cause. And that's a really big red flag for me, honestly. So yeah, the North is in a very, very strange spot. And Baltimore, I mean, week 1, they were, about as close as you can get to winning that football game. Obviously, yeah, and everyone's saying if they get that touchdown, they're going to go for 2. You never know what's going to happen. But then last week against Las Vegas, this was one of the games that I kind of checked out of. We had Red Zone on. We had a multi-box setup going. And this was one of the ones where we were like, yeah, Baltimore beat them. Oh, I guess it's low scoring, but yeah, Baltimore beat them. And then all of a sudden we turn it back on and the Raiders are, about to kick, it's crunch time and the Raiders are about to win it. And we're like, what happened?
Had the Ravens in your survivor league too. So
that's the two biggest favorites.
Kansas City and Cincinnati. And imagination, does the rest of the league go out of its way to find a way to make sure Kansas City continues to win football games? I mean, I look, the call was correct. The Patrick Fitz call was 100% correct. But
yeah,
and that game is over. And in reality, that's what winners do. Winners are 2-0. The Chiefs are 2-0. The Chiefs easily could be 0-2 to start off this season. And we're having this conversation. What's wrong with Kansas City? A toe here, a pass interference there on 4th and 16, and the defending champs are 2-0, and life is beautiful once again. Now, let me ask you: is Easton Stick going to be the one that's getting the start for the Chargers?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
Here's what I'd say about that: Easton Stick, to me, just kind of needs to. Well, only difference is the defense is much different. Like Malik Willis last week, they didn't need Malik Willis to throw 300 yards at all. And I don't think that they need Easton Stick to throw 300 yards because that's not what the Chargers do. I think what could be the problem for them is my expectations if Justin Herbert were in this game and healthy, for him to throw somewhere about 175 to 200 yards and get that running game, because that's a Jim Harbaugh team. That's what they want to do. But the defense is so good that even if the Chargers are able to run some, they're going to have to complete some stuff through the air. Pittsburgh, I think. The only thing I truly feel good about in this game is the under.
Yeah, I mean, if your game plan is to run the ball down the Pittsburgh Steelers' throat, I mean, good luck, because
Their game plan. That's the Chargers' game plan,
yeah.
but it would have been if Herbert was playing too. So,
But now you don't have.
let's not forget that J.K. Dobbins has looked like the best running back in the NFL so far. I know he's not, but those type of numbers so far. So who knows?
Absolutely. I mean, you are right about that. J.K. Dobbins, a story that, has to put a smile on your face as a football fan, a guy who's had, going back to college, some of the worst injury luck that I can really remember. So it's great to see him balling out. Funny, too, under the former Michigan head coach. You have the former Ohio State player bringing those bonds together. That's what the NFL is all about, right? But without Justin Herbert there, without that steady hand to kind of take the top over the defense, Pittsburgh's defense has looked like a top 3 defense at a minimum these first 2 weeks. I mean, pass rush, the secondary, which I expected to maybe be the weak point of that defense. You have a guy like Dante Jackson really stepping up. I think he got an interception week 1. Minka Fitzpatrick back there, obviously. It's solid from top to bottom. I mean, like you said, though, the Pittsburgh offense has not been inspiring. There's definitely wiggle room there because we don't know what they're going to produce. We don't know. I mean, I think they named Justin Fields the starter, but we don't know in 3 or 4 weeks if that's still going to be the case. But so specifically for this week, I think that's the way the Chargers would have a chance. I'm fully expecting the Steelers to be 3-0 after this week.
And we'll move on to the next division. The winner of that Steelers-Chargers game will need to score at least blank points.
17, 14 maybe?
And I think that's probably right. See, that's crazy to think of that in this day and age, but that's probably true. You're first to 17. It's just, but I think that might be where we're at. Let's talk about the AFC West. This is a little bit different division here. As we mentioned, KC on top, no surprise there to go along with Los Angeles, both 2-0 coming into that game. I would submit to you, I feel like the Chargers have been the more impressive 2-0 so far. But look, we set the defending Super Bowl, 2-time Super Bowl champs to a higher standard, and I understand that. But what they are doing is finding a way to win football games, and that's really what matters. I'm going to concentrate a little bit on the other two so far. Where is respectable football? I mean, they haven't looking at this as degraded as the roster got by the Russell Wilson experience. Pretty salty, playing tough football. And look, I do. Bo Nix coming out with minimal weapons is not going to set the world on fire. They're going to play low scoring games, but they play hard. About that aspect of them, I've watched both their games. They've played hard, and then you have the Raiders. Week number 1, the Chargers just kind of stymied them, but then they step up, beat a team like Baltimore, and coming out party for Brock Bowers. Brock has 8-9 catches in that game last week.
Like that.
Really want to get him involved, and I think he's going to help really open up that thing for the Raiders. They have their quarterback, and that's fine, and I get that. But I think what you're going to see. I think you're going to see Pierce have those cats ready to play each and every week. While the overall talent I don't think is there, I think that's one of those games that if you don't watch out, they'll bite you from week to week.
Absolutely. The Raiders, to me, look like one of those classic scrappy teams that's going to be maybe contending for that 7 seed, that last wild card spot. But even if they're not, you don't want to see these guys week 15, 16, 17. If you're trying to, clinch a division, get playoff seeding, there's not really the talent all the way up and down the roster. But, I mean, Max Crosby, Brock Bowers, like you said, I mean, they've got guys, they've got guys. And Antonio Pierce, a coach that I really love, a coach that I think last week really speaks to him. Him having those guys in that mindset, especially they did fall behind early in that game too. And, Gardner Minshew threw an interception.
It was on that D-line too. I mean, yeah, you're right. That line is going to be their hallmark, that and that intermediate passing game. Now, if you'll excuse me just one second, Marco. Hey, gallery over there. I heard that little, you got a problem with what we said about the Raiders? Yeah. Playoff prediction last year, the AFC. Yeah, but I that's exactly what we just labeled them as, a team that from week to week, if you are not ready, will bite you. Just ask the Baltimore Ravens, who needed a bounce back win, who was a toe from being in to going for 2 to beating the world champions on their own field, needed bounce back win, and the Raiders wouldn't let them have it. Watch for the Raiders. If you're a contender, they can hurt you. To the AFC, unless do you have anything else about the West you wanted to add before we go to the NFC?
Bo Nix needs to stop throwing into quadruple coverage, man. That was rough to watch. It happened multiple times.
Yeah, well, I think he's a guy who's always battled and success, wherever he's gone. And I think he's the type of player. What I'm trying to say is he's the type of player continue to do the same stupid things. If it's not working for him, he will make adjustments. He's a smart quarterback. He's a smart leader. And if he sees that's going to work, he's going to do something else. He will pivot. And he's got Sean Payton in his ear. So,
yeah.
Is he going for NFL MVP? No. You got to give him a little time there. Plus, how much better would he look as a quarterback if he still had Jerry Jeudy?
Fair point.
Not. He's in Cleveland now and looking pretty good, by the way. Let's go to the NFC. Let's start with the division that has been a couple of years, but is starting to look like a division you don't want to screw around with. Now, Carolina looks every bit as bad as they have been. The Bryce Young experiment is not over, but on pause right now for the Andy Dalton experience. Andy Dalton, because he's going to get hurt. Mm-hmm. The Carolina Panthers are still... remember how a couple of years ago they were talking about how the Dolphins could be historically bad? And that didn't stay that way. It changed quickly. Carolina has a chance to be way on up there for the historically bad football teams. They're not really good at anything. Not trying to hurt Panthers fans. They know that already. Just know what we're clinging to if I'm a Panthers fan. The hope is the only thing, for something better, because it's not there. They could go winless this year. I don't know that they will, but they could. They have that type of the right word. I'm not sure. I look at Falcons. Let me look at the two teams at the top of that division. And not only do they are sitting at the top of their division, they look like two of the better teams in all of the NFL. Overly surprised about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, this is a team who game last year, has won that division 3 years in a row. Baker Mayfield is probably playing his best football. This team looks good. They do. I'm not overly surprised by that. What I'm surprised by is how quickly New Orleans has advanced. Going into the season, they needed to get that offensive line together. Well, Talisi Fuaga's looked great so far. Their pick out of OSU, that'd be Oregon State, if you will. Trevor Penning, who the fans have been so angry with, is really starting to look like, okay, the light's on. And the light came on. Trevor Penning's he's a monster. It's just waiting for that to come on. It looks like it did. Kamara, 4 touchdowns last week. Derek Carr looking great. Secondary's been fantastic. He's shown to an already very good defense, and everything is clicking for Dennis Allen and the Saints. And then you have an Atlanta Falcons team who, despite the loss to Pittsburgh in week number 1, bounced back and won probably shouldn't have, but won a gutsy win on the road against Philadelphia Eagles. And I got to tell you, you start looking at some of those offensive playmakers. Bijan Robinson, man, physical, good looking runner. They're getting Drake London involved. So we'll see if they continue. Didn't do much so far with Kyle Pitts, at least last week anyway. That offense, and under the tutelage of Kirk Cousins, even if it's for 1 year, you can already see his impact. The NFC South went from the worst division in football to, in a very short amount of time, in my mind, one of the better ones, because if Atlanta is the third best team in that division, to Philly and won, I think it kind of speaks to some of the strength of the NFC South this year.
Yeah, I think the NFC South quickly emerging maybe as the best division in football this year, and certainly going to be one of the most fun ones to watch down the stretch. New Orleans, the surprise of the season for me so far. I mean, these are guys that I expected, okay, they've got some talent. They've got some guys. They'll win, 7, 8 games. I mean, New Orleans has looked unreal, and I think a lot of that has to be contributed to Clint Kubiak, their new offensive coordinator. I mean, totally unlocking Derek Carr, something that, I've seen in interviews, Derek Carr has spoken to that relationship, how that's formed already. So something to be very, very excited about. Man, I watched that game against Dallas, and after the first or second possession where New Orleans had the ball, there was really never a doubt for me. I was like, there's nothing Dallas can do to stop these guys. They're hitting them from every angle. They're running it right down their throats. Shocking to me, honestly, shocking. Now you move to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, gutsy win against Detroit. A Detroit team that I think we can still agree is going to be a good team, going to be one of those teams at the top of the NFC moving forward.
No doubt.
I mean, a gutsy win to go on the road there, avenge that last year's playoff loss. Baker Mayfield, the one thing you could never say about him, even during his ups and downs, that guy has heart. That guy's a leader, and now he's actually showing it on the field like he did last year, proving last year was not a fluke. Even though he loses his coordinator, he's still executing. They still look like a good team. And then Atlanta, I think we both picked Atlanta to win this division before the season. And look, it hasn't looked maybe as good as I'd expect it to. But look, you have Kirk Cousins coming off that Achilles injury. That's a major injury. Not too long ago, a guy gets an Achilles injury at his age, his career's over. So look, he looked a little clunky week 1 against Pittsburgh. That was a game that I watched. He didn't look mobile. He didn't maybe look super confident in planning with that leg. But I'm sure as the season goes on, as he gets some more reps, as maybe he takes some more hits, he's going to get more comfortable with it. I mean, a win like that against Philadelphia, while I do agree with you, maybe they didn't deserve to win that game, maybe they shouldn't have won that game, that's a win that's going to do a lot for a team in terms of their mentality. When they're down later in games going forward in the season, they're going to be able to look back on that and say, you know what, guys, we can do this. And Drake London, I mean, specifically on that route, on that game-winning touchdown, I mean, looking every bit as good as I thought he was going to look. I mean, that is a really, really special receiver they have out there in Atlanta. Bijan looking like a great, great running back. I think this is going to be a really, really exciting 3-horse race. And I think this was going to be one that's going to come down to the end of the year. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 of these teams found their way into the playoffs this year.
Absolutely could. And one of the reasons could be is let's move to the NFC West. West is a whole bunch of all right football, I guess. You know, I'll tell you this, Arizona could just as easily be 2-0 right now.
Yeah.
You know, of course, they got their win, got Marvin Harrison going last week. Boy, after that dud of a opening game in his rookie season where he saw 4 targets and 1 catch, 2 major touchdowns by halftime, quarter last week, and Arizona looked very good and much improved. I don't know what that means. I mean, their loss was a game in which Buffalo at Orchard Park had to come from behind and win football game. Arizona, if I'm truthful about it, has actually looked like the best team in this division so far, which would really freak me out. What's interesting about this is we've seen good and bad football out of all 3 of those other teams. You know, from the Rams, Niners, I call last week's loss at home against Minnesota, a team we will be talking about in a few minutes, as applicable. And also, I know they dealt with injuries. Now George Kittle's hurt, and I get all these things, but that's still a veteran deep roster. I mean, they continue to win games overall, but about McCaffrey being out, because even with McCaffrey out, they still get solid production in the backfield. Something missing with the 2024 version of the 49ers, at least out the box. And I'm not sure if injuries are the reason for it or what, but this team looks like a team who's capped on how far they're going to go right now. I don't see anything in this division, at least after 2 weeks, that's really impressive that I would expect to make some huge run towards the NFC Championship, at least not so far.
Yeah, you know, obviously, I don't think it's correct to write off the 49ers just based on what we've seen from them,
Not
but I do
doing that,
agree with you. But I agree with you, though.
doing
The
that, I'm
vibe
not
has been
doing
weird. No, I know. Yeah, I know. But the vibe has been weird in both of these games. Even week 1 against the Jets, you know, they get the win, but it didn't exactly feel right. And there have been a lot of moving parts. You know, you mentioned the injuries. Nick Bosa also going down against Minnesota. You know, you have your number 1 receiver. They don't even know if he's going to be on the team until a couple days before the season starts. I mean, these are all things that have to factor in. McCaffrey being out almost seems like the least of their problems because, like you mentioned, they've gotten pretty much identical, maybe not identical, but high-end production out of that running back position still. But I think last week, if we're talking about specifically the Minnesota game, I think a lot of the credit has to go to Brian Flores, you know, the defensive coordinator for Minnesota. The looks they were giving him, you saw Brock Purdy talk about it. You saw Brock Purdy go up to him after the game and say, I think the quote was, "Your scheme is insane, man." So that's something we definitely have to take into account. But it is surprising, not only just seeing them lose that game, but it didn't really feel like a fluke loss. It felt like watching that game that Minnesota was the better team throughout it. So that's definitely, it's got to concern you a little bit. Look, they have a lot of time to get healthy, to get things figured out, to get maybe, you know, the kinks ironed out, to get Ayuk maybe more up to speed. But it's not what we've seen in years past, for sure.
We were about Minnesota just a second ago, and that leads us to the North.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps for me, the most interesting division. So Chicago Bears. Now, the game against the Titans was, and I want to give the Bears credit. I think a lot more of it had to do with with Tennessee, a breakdown in special teams, or a block punt that led to a touchdown, explicable pick six by Will Levis, and that thing. Matter of fact, the defense didn't give anything up and still lost that football game in half. And I trust that defense, but the reality is, and we can talk about, oh, look who they added, but the reality is the Titans offense has question marks in my mind. And then last week, I'll tell you, I'll say this, and I said this on the show this week, Marco. If you just go by the numbers that Caleb Williams put up on Sunday Night Football against the Texans, and that's all you did, numbers, I would that you didn't watch the football game.
Mm-hmm.
I did watch that football game, and I know they lost. They lost to a very good team on the road. Caleb Williams' very first road game of his career, and I mean, it's not great. Did see, if you watched that game, was this guy was working some throws that he make in his second game. And I said this, look, he did not have Keenan Allen, which he will not have Sunday either. I don't know if you knew that, Chuck. Keenan Allen's out. Was there, but not really. I mean, he was questionable all the way up to game time pretty much, and just wasn't able to do a whole heck of a lot that's, perform like you would expect a full, ready-to-go Rome Odunze to do. Had chances to win that game, and one of the reasons was some throws that Caleb Williams was able to make. Speaking, it's not a pretty start out of there, but if I'm Matt Eberflus and I am this Bears fan base, I'm looking at the potential here and some of these early plays that I have seen Caleb Williams make, and it gets me real excited. But they got a problem. Their defense is going to lock most teams down. And they have, and they will continue to do that. They have not given up 20 points yet, and they won't be doing that this weekend either. The issue for the Chicago Bears outside of injuries right now, frankly, is their offensive line. They needed that to be fixed, and it hasn't. I mean, they've addressed it. It just hasn't come to fruition yet. The offensive line has been terrible so far. Caleb Williams is so flexible and versatile in that pocket. It hadn't looked quite as bad. It's that bad. To get where they want to be, that offensive line's got to come through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd be very, very concerned about that. Not just because obviously coming into the offseason, everybody knew that was what they needed to improve and it hasn't improved, but also when you're trying to develop a rookie quarterback, a young quarterback, having a bad offensive line is about one of the worst things you could give to him, in terms of a situation. Darnell Wright, I mean, a guy who they invested a first-round pick. I mean, he's been a glorified traffic cone out there. I mean, it's like, what are they doing? I do agree with you that in terms of Williams' play specifically, the stats haven't looked good, especially week one. It wasn't pretty. But look, he's a young quarterback. There are going to be flaws. There are going to be bumps in the road. And the talent has been on display, which I think is the important part, is he's still making plays. He's still doing things that are showing us, okay, there's a reason this guy was picked number one. He's not out there like say Bryce Young, last year's number one overall pick, or even in those early games, you're just not really seeing flashes of anything. And like you said, the defense, rock solid. The defense and special teams winning them that game week one, along with Tennessee's mishaps, I suppose. But the defense still rock solid. You love to see that. And look, was anybody really expecting them to go down to Houston on Sunday Night Football and win that game? I know I wasn't personally.
That counts for anything, but yeah, no. And I think, by the way, I think Jalen Johnson's one of three best quarterbacks in the game today. And they locked him down, and he's really to me, he's the catalyst of that defense, him and a couple of other players. Bay, to judge Green Bay by last week's results. I mean, I know they won that game, and they're 1-1 coming into this week. Out the run, that would be a problem. That's going to be a problem for them this year. They'll need to find a way to be able to do that. I'm not judging the offense because Malik Willis was fine. Had he been playing a real team last week, he would have gotten in trouble, I think. But that's speculation because he 14 of 60. Anything I say about what he wouldn't have done is pure speculation. Defensive issues they need to work out, especially against the run, has not been ruled out, at least not to this point. I haven't, unless it's happened in the last couple of hours in Tennessee this week. Go in and win that game against the Titans without him, yes. The difference is we'll stop Josh Jacobs. Maybe not stop him, but they'll do it a lot better than the Indianapolis Colts did last week.
Won't be like last week, yeah.
that happens and Malik Willis is quarterbacking, then it may come to a position where he has to win the day. Can he win the day? I don't know. Well, if Will Levis can either, and
Yeah.
if I Packers question mark is their run defense, nothing that I love all that particularly much about the Titans running game. They don't have
Mhm.
Jonathan Taylor back there. So it's their offensive line either. This could be especially if Jordan Love does not play, Marco, this could one of the ugliest games of the week. I'm not ready to judge the Packers one way or the other yet, but I do believe that their run defense will be an issue for them this year.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you that you can't pass judgment on a team when their starting quarterback goes down week one. But at the same time, I mean, what Saquon Barkley did to those guys on Monday Night Football, I mean, I guess Friday Night Football, technically, in the Brazil game, but Saquon Barkley had his way with them, And obviously, that's a very good running back. That's a very good offensive line in Philly, or it's supposed to be at least. But you never want to see a running back putting up that type of production on you. But I agree with you. It's all about Jordan Love. It's all about getting Jordan Love back, when that's going to happen, how healthy is he going to be when he comes back. That's the key to the season. They're going to go as far as that guy will take them at the end of the day, because their defense, while it's not bad by any means, their defense isn't going to be the reason they're winning these games. It's going to have to fall on that offense eventually.
Right. Of course, they've had some injuries here. St. Brown has been banged up. He's not been healthy and 100%. Of course, Jameer Gibbs, of course, the first game of the season, we weren't sure if he was going to play. Look, they're 1-1, and there's no reason to panic. And that was a tough, hard-fought game against a good team last week. I don't have anything negative to say about Detroit. Detroit is basically about what I expect them to be, a team that is good enough in the trenches and through the air and on the ground, and frankly, against the run and pass, then their best football. There's no reason why they shouldn't be one of the last two or three teams playing football in the NFC this year. I mean, they had that type of ability. Hadn't been overly impressive to start things out, but that's all right. We played 2 games. The difference here is though they have the personnel. I think maybe it's just about getting them healthy more than anything else.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you in that sense. Detroit, I mean, I was going to say they had to play 2 good teams, but what are the Rams even at this point? I think the Rams are a goodish team, maybe. We don't even know. They're 0-2 right
It's a
now.
9-8 type of football team.
Yeah, but definitely the point is, they haven't had any easy tasks these first 2 weeks. That game last week, obviously, you would have liked to have won it. There are obviously some decisions and plays that go one way or another. It's a flip-flop game. You're not going to really put too much stock in them losing that game, especially if Tampa Bay is what they're looking to be right now. I think Detroit, I agree with you. I think Detroit is going to be contending for the NFC, for potentially the Super Bowl. They have the personnel. They got to just get their guys in line. I think they also just kind of have to get into that same rhythm they were in last year. I feel like around the middle of the season last year, they just got into this kind of the flow, where they were all playing for each other. They had the whole cult of personality with Dan Campbell. The entire city was rallying behind them. They need to kind of get that momentum going, get that juju going, maybe get 1 or 2 big wins, maybe knock off the Packers, maybe, get some big primetime win, get some momentum, get some energy behind that team again. Because I really think that energy is part of what fueled them last year. I think these things that you can't necessarily measure off the field really did play a factor last year. And Detroit, they've got talent, but now they have expectations, and they haven't had expectations down there in a long time, right? So how are they going to cope with it? And maybe if they drop a game they're not supposed to, is that going to send off alarm bells? Or are they going to be able to stay on course? That's what I'm looking at for Detroit moving forward.
Get to the team that I don't care what they can go 17-0, and everybody said they ain't any good. Second. And I get it. I understand the past. I'm wide aware of Sam Darnold's past. This does not matter right now. What matters is how he's playing right now. He's averaging 240 yards a game and completing 72% of his passes. He's not turning the football over, and he's not just turning around and handing it off either. He's putting the ball up, and he's throwing it to his team with a lot of success. Vikings were supposed to completely fall apart. That's all we heard. No more Cousins, no more Danielle Hunter. This team is going to take a backseat. And honestly, if you look at it as if the entire receiving corps has been killing it, Jordan Addison hadn't done much of nothing yet so far. Without, was it Hawkinson that they've been out? They ain't had him yet, right?
Yeah, and Addison's been hurt too, I think, during week 1.
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah.
manufacturing yards and points. I mean, as you said, they went down to San Francisco, did not luck their way into that game. They won that game flat out. Protected the football and delivered it to his team. The name on the back of the jersey, I get it. That's one thing, but the production is there, and Minnesota has looked good 2 weeks in a row. Is this all smoke and mirrors? Can this continue?
I don't know if it's going to continue to this extent where they're beating teams of the caliber of the Niners, but I don't think it's smoke and mirrors. I think a lot of this has to go to Kevin O'Connell. I mean, outstanding job coaching. I mean, they've had, losing your projected starting quarterback. I don't know if JJ was officially named that, but losing your first round pick, your new quarterback in the preseason. I mean, that would
quarterback, and he was looking great. Yeah.
That would kill a lot of team seasons. There's a lot of teams, a lot of coaching staffs that aren't going to be able to bounce back from not just a on the field talent perspective, but from the emotional blow of that too. But Minnesota has looked beyond impressive. I mean, look, we're not going to put too much stock into them beating, the crap out of the Giants. The Giants are the Giants, obviously. I think a lot of teams would do that to the Giants. But last week was beyond impressive. And they showed some determination. They showed some grit at the end of that game when San Francisco was starting to kind of maybe get back into it, starting to maybe, it looked like, okay, they had their fun, but the course is correcting almost. But no, Minnesota, they played hard-nosed football. And some of these throws by Sam Darnold, I mean, I saw this one clip of this all-22 angle with receivers going right down the seam. He puts it perfectly back shoulder. I mean, it's not like guys are being schemed wide open for him. He's playing quarterback, and he's playing quarterback well. And who knows if he's going to keep it up. I mean, there's a long body of work that says that the bottom might fall out at some point, but good for Sam Darnold. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see where Minnesota goes and how far they can.
Quote that says it ain't where you're from, it's where you're at. And right now they're in a good spot, and Sam Darnold is keeping this team going, and every reason to believe they would fold up before the season really got going, and that has not happened. Let's do our final division, the NFC East. And the Giants a minute ago, out in Carolina, for Minnesota, here's why that was so impressive. They still went on the road and won by 22 points on the road. Carolina. So it's good football. You may have been playing a bad team, but you played good football. Right now, boy, I don't know if you got a chance to watch that Washington Giants game last week. I did. That was
some of it.
Football. It was not overly pretty, but what's crazy is issues that they had then are still the same issues. And right now, look, Malik Nabers is everything they think he was going to be and more. He's legit, but nearly enough to get it done. They have a talent issue. It's clear that Daniel Jones is probably just not that guy. I think he's here's what I'm going to call, listen to this, Chuck. More talented, maybe, and probably not, version of former Titans quarterback. Marcus Mariota. They're the same type of quarterback, more of a runner, long, lean, can throw it. Football team. Okay. You're talking about overall talent-wise. I don't know there's a ton of difference there. And they gave him $40 million a year, and not to be about the same as Marcus Mariota, but be a true franchise game-winning quarterback, and they don't have that. But to be fair to him, he's never had a line. He's never had weapons. He's never had much of anything. Done a great job of getting him what he needed. This is a talent issue, and that Daniel Jones is a good quarterback on a bad team. I'm saying it's had a major effect on who he's become as a quarterback in this league, as far as stunning his development. There's not a lot to like outside of Malik Nabers with the Giants and with Washington. I will say this with Washington, a while, and he's going to take some hits. I don't think there's any questions about that. Going to have to protect himself a little bit more, but Jayden Daniels it does not look like this is too big for him right now, that he is ready to be their quarterback. But I don't necessarily think initially that leads to a lot of wins, at least for the Commanders.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I mean, I have been impressed from what I've seen from Jayden Daniels, kind of what we expected in terms of the way he's using his legs, the way that offense is kind of working around him. But I know you might disagree with me. I know you might say the Colts have a worse one, but I think Washington has the worst secondary in the NFL by far. I knew that was going to be that reaction.
Far, Marco. You know why that? You know why now? If you looked at statistics this year, you'd say, "Oh, the Colts secondary hasn't been that bad." You know why? Knowing the football on them, because they're running for 250 yards a quarter on them. So there's no need to throw the football. They're just sitting back rolling the clock for 45 minutes a game, running it. Trust me, the worst secondary on planet Earth. If this was junior high, or excuse me, Kansas junior college football, the Colts secondary would be the worst one in it.
I knew that was going to get a reaction out of you. But the point being,
I'm
Washington,
passionate about how bad they suck.
Washington, but the point being, Washington secondary is bad. That defense is very, very bad. We saw that week 1 against Tampa Bay. They never really had a shot. There was really nothing Jane Daniels could do because they weren't going to get the ball back. They weren't going to get stops. And that's what's going to kind of relegate them to being one of these bottom tier teams going forward, at least in my opinion. We kind of had like the toilet bowl last week because I think both of those teams, the Giants and the Commanders, are going to be towards the bottom. I don't think there's ever been a playoff win that has hurt a franchise more than that Giants playoff win against Minnesota. Because regardless of what your opinion on Daniel Jones is, if you think he's more of a product of his situation, if you think he's just flat out bad like I do, I mean, investing that type of money when you don't have the guys around him, when you don't have a team that's ready to win now, it's just really never going to be a good decision. And it's kind of
not address the position because you don't have people around. Because the job is to build around them, not the other way around. You build around that quarterback. There's nothing around him.
Jones. Yeah, but I don't think even if you put guys around him, it would be that much. I've been out on Daniel Jones since the day he got drafted. I've never seen it. I've never really been a believer. I thought that one season was more of a product of things falling the right way and Brian Daboll being a good coach. Yeah, I think they're in a bad spot. That's not exactly a revolutionary statement, if you watch them the first.
Still a good coach. He's a good coordinator coming out of Buffalo, but he's had no results. So
I think
why would we give a pass to him and not Daniel Jones?
Well, he did. I mean, the 1 year they did go to the playoffs, they did win a playoff game. What I'm saying is I think that was more Brian Daboll than Daniel Jones. I think it was more Daboll elevating Jones, elevating the rest of that team. They still had Saquon Barkley and they had some games, NFL's a game of inches, right? And they had a lot of things go their way that year. Point being, I think it's going to need to be a complete reset in New York. Regardless of if Daboll's a good coach or not, I think at a certain point, you kind of have to wash things away. Once again, all too familiar with thing, but reset that culture.
That's right. Yeah, kind of hard to rebuild. Yeah. It's like trying to remodel a burning house.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah, no, for sure.
It was. You know what? Chuck will be doing that one on the show next week. Hey, let's do our final two teams. How fortunate for both of these teams with very vocal fan bases that they're in a division that only has two teams in it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we are. That's where we are. There are no scenario in which the Giants or the Commanders win that division. Agreed? It's really a two-team horse race from the start of the kickoff of the first game. Cowboys, about a tale of two games. They went to Cleveland and didn't just win. They thoroughly dominated Cleveland. I mean, they did. They beat their brains out. Sides of the football, and you say, okay, the inning just before kickoff was perfect.
Yeah.
You're getting almost everything taken care of. Here we go. When Saints come to town, the time they can, I think Kamara just scored again. They put it to them country style right there in Jerry's house. This wasn't about a ball bouncing a certain way. This was a complete annihilation on both sides of the football. Now it's week to week. That could not happen the very next week, and they could go down to New Orleans and beat them next week. Who knows? But it was a very disappointing response to a great on-the-road win for the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, I was watching that game with a diehard Cowboys fan, one of my buddies, and the frustration in him was just, oh man, it was undescribable, because it's not just the fact that they lost, it's not just the fact that they lost big, but the way that they lost. I mean, there were a couple drives where I think the Saints ran the ball 6-7 times in a row and got at least 4 or 5 yards in each play. That's the type of thing that really, really concerns you, especially when you look at a team like the Cowboys. They're supposed to be solid up front. They have guys there. They've invested in guys there. We're not supposed to see this from that team, especially at home, especially in their home opener, especially against a team like New Orleans, who coming into the season was not projected to be maybe on the same tier as Dallas. Now, obviously, those projections seem to be way off considering the way New Orleans has performed. But man, I mean, like you said, too, I mean, juxtaposed with that first week, I mean, Dallas dominated them. better physically. They looked better in terms of skill positions. They looked better in terms of coaching. And that's saying a lot because I'm not a big Mike McCarthy guy either. But yeah, they got things to figure out at the end of the day. And same with Philadelphia, too. Honestly, the way that Philadelphia kind of collapsed late in that game, I mean, questionable decisions in terms of late game management with Nick Sirianni. Personally, I don't know. I know Saquon Barkley drops that ball, but I don't know why you're throwing that ball to begin with, at least in my opinion. So two teams, again, like you said, they're very lucky that they don't have to worry about, for example, in the NFC South, they don't have to worry about a lot of competition coming from all places. But it's going to be one of those two teams. Both those two teams, they've shown us a lot of good things. They've also shown us a lot of bad things. It's going to be about these on the fly adjustments and really working through it.
And I think the difference between, because there's a lot of similarities to those two teams, personnel wise. Difference, and it hardly is almost never going to come down to your starting running back. Remember, we don't even value them anymore.
Yeah,
put them up there with holders and mascots and things like that. But difference here is, I mean, the Eagles clearly know who their running base, and Barkley is going to be successful behind that offensive line. There's no way around it. Cowboys going to do about a running game. They don't have one.
Yeah.
Have one. And they don't have a true feedback on that roster. And
no, absolutely.
Figure it out. Figure what out? What is there to figure out for the Cowboys outside of making an off the move? They have on their roster is not capable of carrying them and they're gonna need to be able to run the football. They are. It's going to, if not against bad teams somewhere along the way in the playoffs, sustain drives, milk clock. They can't do that. Who's going to do it for them? That's not going to take off and run the football, nor should he. And anyway, at least if it breaks down, you have a versatile quarterback and you've got a guaranteed running game. Do not possess that player. To you, there may not be, and especially for such a devalued position in this league right now, there's a move that needs to be made more by a playoff contending team than the Dallas Cowboys going out and finding an actual running back right now for this league.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the thing that's got to be frustrating too, if you're a Cowboys fan, is it's not like this problem came up out of nowhere. Anybody with a brain and two eyes could have seen coming into this season that they were going to struggle trotting out the corpse of Ezekiel Elliott and Deuce Vaughn, who I tower over as a normally, sized person. Like, it's not going to do it. And especially a team that a lot of their success in past years, obviously it's been about Dak throwing it, but let's not act like the running game with Tony Pollard hasn't been a big part of their success in years past and part of that offense. And it's just too much to put on Dak's shoulders. I agree with you. I mean, if you're going to want to win games in the playoffs, running the football, it has to happen in some form. It doesn't have to be your main defining thing. You don't have to have a bell cow back you're giving it to 35 times a game. Obviously the NFL has evolved from there, but at the same time, it's just not going to cut it. And I agree with you. I mean, if it was up to me right now, I'm picking Philadelphia to win that division. And I think that's part of the reason why. I think it's the offensive versatility. And I think it's the fact that Philadelphia, I haven't liked what I've seen from them defensively, but I have some sort of faith just based on the fact that it's more so been guys underperforming versus just a lack of overall talent. That's what's kind of giving me that type of faith in Philadelphia to kind of get things right, steer the ship a little bit.
They have balance throughout their offense from the top four receivers in no particular order in this league right now, and it's certainly debatable. Mention to you, Nico Collins. You know what I think about him. Jefferson, Cheetah, and what is wrong with me today? CeeDee Lamb, got superstars. But after CeeDee Lamb, you in the Dallas offense, and it doesn't matter that he's getting the ball because he still smoke all your guys and get open and do it. He made when he split that double right there for that long touchdown was a thing of beauty. But everybody knows that's who it has to be. If I'm Philadelphia, does it have to be Saquon Barkley that day? No. Have to be A.J. Brown that day? No, I could go Devontae Smith that day. They have these other prime premier weapons. You're asking that Dallas defense and Dak Prescott to do a whole hell of a lot this year because I think skill position wise, they are, I'm not going to say they're bereft of it, but they have problems. They personnel issue more than a Mike McCarthy issue. They have a personnel issue, I think, at the skill position for that team, for them to go further than that, to go as far as they want to go.
I mean, yeah, we didn't see A.J. Brown in that Monday night game against the Falcons. Now, obviously, they lose that game. But can we imagine what would happen if the Cowboys lose CeeDee Lamb? What would that offense even look like? How are they going to score points without him? I mean, it's a serious.
You may be able to find out.
Yeah.
It's like that. So it's a it's a 2-horse race, but in my mind, it's not really that close. To me, it's an easy Philly.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be true, but just personnel wise, that's an easy Philadelphia.
Where we're sitting right now, I would have to agree with you. Yeah.
Look at the NFL through 2 weeks. Before we get out of here, Marco, is there anything that you're looking at this week as far as game-wise want to take a look at, or maybe a game that everybody needs to look at for the NFL in week number 3? And don't say you like the Jets.
Yeah. This week, I'm really, really excited to watch this Sunday night game, this Chiefs-Falcons game. I think this is a really big test for the Falcons coming off that big win last week, seeing if they're going to be able to keep that momentum going up against the defending champs, obviously. I'm really excited to see what Atlanta looks like and to see if they're going to really be able to match up with those other 2 strong teams in that division going forward.
I'm looking at this, and there's a couple that really piqued my interest. Obviously, this Vikings game. Texans are on the road, 2-0 in the division. This is a couple of 2-0 teams, and no one believes in Minnesota. Let me just say this: if after 3 weeks, Sam Darnold has wins over San Francisco on the road and Houston at home.
What can you say?
I say Frank, San Francisco and Houston, there'll be people who have those 2 top 5 teams. If he
Absolutely
beats both of them, we're having a different conversation. Not about is he the future in Minnesota, but it won't be, well, we're doing it in spite of him. It won't be that anymore. Well, it may still be there, but if able to leg out a win there as well over a team like the Texans, even though it's at home, but on the heels of a big win in San Francisco, I think you got to take a look at that. And that might be, I'm not sure, is that the only matchup of 2-0 teams? No. The Chargers and Steelers is also a matchup of 2-0 teams, which I know that makes you very happy. I'll be taking a look at that game right there. And then the other one that we mentioned a minute ago, somebody walking out of down the big fat problem, either a 1-2 Cowboys or an 0-3 Ravens.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one for sure, and one with really big implications.
Brother, there's an hour, man. You want to do it again next week?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
So we got to take a look at next week, as well as we'll be inside the final week of regular season for Major League Baseball, and there's still a lot that is determined. So I think we'll talk a little bit about what happens this coming up weekend in NFL football, but we'll also need to dive headlong into that final week of Major League Baseball's regular season.
I mean, it's like one of the best times for sports of the entire year, right? There's just so much going on. It's awesome.
Marco Scuteri, I am the Fish. This has been Marco and the Fish on the Walker Talk Radio Network. Marco, we'll see you next week. As for the rest of you, have a great day, and we'll be back with another episode of Marco and the Fish next week.